Hi, this is Mike Brown, owner of Death Wish Coffee Company. Welcome to Fueled by Deathcast.
I love Jeff, but sweet and hot. Whoop, Mr. Motorama coffee spot.
Death Wish Coffee presents Fueled by Deathcast, the world's strongest podcast. With your hosts, the incredible Jeff and the amazing DMAN.
Welcome, everybody, to Fueled by Deathcast. I am the incredible Jeff.
And I am the amazing D-Man.
And we welcome you all back. And as always, we want to thank the awesome Brock Powell, BrockVox.com. That is our voiceover guy who does all those really cool bumps that you hear throughout this entire show.
Science!
And this week, there's some pretty crazy science news there, D-Man.
You're going to freak me out again, aren't you, Jeff?
Yeah. Not to really freak you out too bad, but Skynet is real and we're all going to die.
Shit.
Yeah. I am kind of joking.
I knew this day would come.
Yeah, I'm kind of joking. So
one day the podcast is going to talk back to us, Jeff.
Yeah, that's going to really happen, and it's going to be scary. And I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords.
It apparently is going to talk back to us in all the languages, though.
Yeah. So last year into this year, Google has been rolling out a lot more artificial intelligence into their programming. And just in 2016, I believe it was in September, they announced that their new system called the Neural Machine Translation System had gone live. And basically what that is, it's an AI system that quickly and accurately translates text into different languages. So if you're reading an article in Japanese and you want to be able to read it in English, it'll translate it for you through Google Translate. The AI, the artificial intelligence that's attached to this program, allows it to learn as it goes, so the translations become better. It's not broken English when it comes back to you. It actually translates it in a more readable, type fashion. And it goes backwards, too. If there's an English article that you want to read in Japanese, it's the same kind of thing. They just found out, though, very recently that this program has created its own language that we can't decipher.
Did we tell it to do this?
No.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it did it on its own. Basically, I'll explain it like this. They taught the program to translate from English to Japanese and English to Korean, and then the backwards of that, Japanese to English and Korean to English. Now, without teaching this program, they asked it to translate from Japanese to Korean, and it did it without having to go through that English doorway. It just figured out on its own how to make those checks and make it happen, and it was a 98% success rate. It was very readable and very, very well translated. So it created this internal language to be able to figure out how to do what it's supposed to do without us telling it to do that. So again, I must reiterate, John Connor, run for your life. The Terminators are coming.
It also found 6 different ways to blend human flesh.
Yes. It's not that scary. I am kidding a little bit, but it is pretty crazy.
Well, now this thing can talk to itself without us knowing what it's saying.
Without its knowing, yeah. And that's
it's like being in a Mexican restaurant and they're talking about you, but you can't do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, again, it's just an interesting thing when you think about that man created this artificial intelligence, and now the same creation that we created, the artificial intelligence, is now creating its own stuff. So, yikes.
Oh, man. Singularity is right around the corner, brother.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So that was a little wake you up in the morning with some.
Yeah. Now that we scared the shit out of you.
Yeah.
You're good to go now.
Yeah.
What fuels you?
This week I kind of wanted to talk about what fuels us in the sense of creativity and imagination. We have an incredible guest later on in the show, a comic book creator by the name of Marz, and we talk a little bit about that. And I know that in my everyday life, something that fuels me is my creative side, totally. And I think that goes the same for you, D-Man.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it comes down to things we've done in the past, music was always there.
Yeah.
Music was always like, this thing never existed until we thought it up and tried it out and turned it into what it is now. And it's kind of like, not only is that piece of music a snowflake in itself, but every time you play it, it's different.
Yeah.
And it becomes its own entity.
Yeah.
You're actually making something live.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. And now, even with podcasting, like this podcast never existed until we sat around and thought it up and came up with a plan and worked with the voice actor and worked with the company. And we brought something into this world that has never existed before, whether it be good, bad, whatever it is. And that's always what seems to be fueling me into what am I going to do next? What am I going to bring forth that has never been brought forth before?
Yeah, I agree. And, you brought up music. Both you and I have been in bands for a very long time. And that's something that I love about that creation is seeing something adapt and change from just the spark of an idea in your head to then a fully realized song down the road, and it's something that never existed before. And you kind of get that whole story, that you know the origin story of that song or that creation. And this goes to anything in life. There are great cooks out there that create a dish that has never been tasted before.
I'm just thinking about tapestry.
Yeah. But there's all these different aspects. Even architects, create buildings that have never been realized, or bridges and stuff like that. It's there's the ability that humans have to create. And
you know what's weird is that a lot of technology comes from imagined things. A lot of our technologies come from Star Trek episodes when they're using freaking iPads or
flip phones.
You know what I watched yesterday that was like, oh, we have half that stuff right now.
Yeah.
I was watching Minority Report, which is now a 14-year-old movie.
Right.
We're 14 years away from that, and we're coming closer and closer to what they're doing. Some of it actually seemed a little bit almost like primitive to some of the technologies we have now, which is it's pretty weird seeing technology being fueled by even like down to Hollywood.
Or science fiction, definitely. Even the old science fiction writers like Isaac Asimov and those types of guys, they would just dream up these imaginative ideas of tech and robots and that kind of stuff. And now we have those types of things, or we're getting closer and closer to that. And it's pretty cool. It's definitely something that fuels me, is the ability to create and the ability to keep thinking about what other people can create. Creation is a beautiful thing. Imagination is an incredible fuel, to keep it going.
It's the one thing that separates us from a lot of other living beings is the ability to be creative.
Definitely.
You see that in animals as well, but it's next level what humans can create. It's pretty wild, man. If you really sit down and think deep about it, and it'll spin you out if you're not careful.
Yeah, it's awesome. So get out there and and imagine something new. We did, and now you're listening to Fueled by Deathcast. It's pretty fun. Speaking of something new, though, and that might set one person apart from the rest, last week we tried out something new, and I think it went pretty well. We decided to do a giveaway. And all you had to do was share the podcast and hashtag Fueled by Deathcast.
Share on Facebook.
Yep, share on Facebook. And we were going to give away an incredible, cool, handmade pewter coffee scoop from Crosby and Taylor.
You got it.
And we have the winner. I don't even know the winner.
You don't
do.
even. I know the winner.
We did a random number. We did a random number to
it's funny.
Winner.
I didn't know how we were going to do the giveaway, and I didn't know what it was going to be like. I'm really excited about it now.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So we rolled the die.
Uh-huh.
And I'm really glad Mr. Mayhew won this.
Oh, well, congratulations to Stephen Mayhew. You have won yourself a pretty cool coffee scoop.
So I'm going to look up your address on my database here. And we'll send this right out to you.
And everybody keep listening to the podcast. Keep sharing it. Keep tweeting about it. Keep, doing all that you do. It really is helping us out. We love you all for it. And we're going to do more giveaways, not every week, but it'll be some fun things that we do. So there'll be more chances to win some cool stuff through our little podcast here.
The Death Wish Death List.
This week, we lost actor Alan Thicke. Suddenly had a heart attack, 69 years old. And not to be too funny about it, but he died the most Canadian way possible. He had a heart attack playing hockey with his son, and joked about it on the way into the stretcher that his son should take a picture of him and post it on social media, like all laid out on the stretcher. But he unfortunately died. Great actor. He's very hardworking. He hosted a lot of TV shows and award shows, but also is probably best known as playing the dad on the longtime sitcom Growing Pains. He also later in life played himself in tons of appearances, like on Family Guy and the like. But one thing that a lot of people don't know is he was a very accomplished musician, and he wrote a lot of television theme songs. He wrote the theme song to Different Strokes, The Facts of Life, and even the original Wheel of Fortune theme.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. We also lost Bob Krasno this year. He was 82 years old. He was born in Rochester, New York. And his early career, he started out as a promoter for James Brown, which is a pretty good way to get into the music business.
Yeah.
And then he started to work for and actually started up various record labels in the 60s in L.A. until he finally started Blue Thumb Records that boasted a lot of big names like Ike and Tina Turner. And he also discovered, signed, and produced Captain Beefheart on
I've never
that
heard of
record.
Captain Beefheart.
Captain Beefheart actually played a lot with Frank Zappa.
Oh, okay. That sounds like the type of group that would play with Frank Zappa.
In 1984, Bob Krasno became the CEO of Elektra Records. He held that position for 10 years, and then he went on to co-found the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Wow.
So that was pretty incredible life from Mr. Krasno, who died 82 years old this week. This week in Death Wish You a Happy Birthday, though, Brad Pitt is going to be 53 years old.
He still looks 53.
Yes, he does. Samuel L. Jackson, Nick Fury himself, is going to be 68 years
and he
old.
Still looks 53.
And former drummer of the band Kiss, Peter Criss, is going to be 71 years old.
Still looks 86.
There it is. And we're going to take a short break and give you this week's DMAN Death Wish update.
DMAN's Death Wish Update. Brought to you by Death Wish Coffee.
And we're back.
Yes, we are. Welcome back, everybody. This is the week of December 23rd. Merry Christmas to all of you out there. The holidays are just right around the corner. Also, a happy Hanukkah coming up very soon as well.
But the Kwanzaa thing too.
And Kwanzaa, yes, yep. It's a very, very merry time of year. Speaking of, what do we got this week, D-Man?
All right, so if you're listening to this right now, we have the random gift card going on. We're doing it again, and we've tightened up the bolts, and I think this is going to run great this time around, so I'm excited to bring this back out. And pretty much the idea is that randomly in your mailbox, you will get a code that you can use, and it will be for a random amount of
percentage off.
Yeah.
Nice, very cool. What is is there a cap? Is there like is there one person out there who'll get 100% off?
Oh, maybe. You never know.
Okay,
it's
cool.
like the lottery, man.
Cool.
It could change your life.
200% off. You guys actually pay. No,
Sure, man. Sure.
No,
Keep on digging.
That will not happen.
All right, so I have some really cool news for those who are a fan of our Clean Canteens. And if you don't
They're
know,
so awesome.
Clean Canteen's a great company right out of Seattle.
Yep.
One of those companies that we really like working with. Made in the States, really, really high quality item. Well, we're redesigning them for 2017.
Excellent. Very cool.
So in January, you will be able to get a hold of a newly designed Death Wish Clean Canteen and a newly designed Valhalla Java Canteen.
So
yeah,
cool.
you got to see both of them, but the Valhalla Java Clean Canteen looks really, really cool.
Yeah, you guys are in for a treat, and we're going to be able to see those early 2017, so we'll let you know, obviously, when it gets closer to the release date of that.
And once again, that was designed by the awesome Thomas Dragonetti.
Of course.
Killing
Gotta
it
love
again, dude.
Gotta love it.
So one last thing I want to bring to you people, at the end of the year, we will be having a clearance sale. So any of the stuff that you have been seeing throughout the year, we'll be putting it up for sale just to kind of clear our shelves off and make room for all the cool stuff we got coming in 2017. So that is your chance to go back and grab anything that you weren't able to find throughout the year, including maybe you might see a DMAN mug up there make a reappearance.
Well, that's awesome that, end of the year clearance sale. You can just spend your whole day over at deathwishcoffee.com. You can listen to all the episodes of our podcast while you just shop for everybody that you know and love and get all that cool stuff.
Or yourself.
At a discount because it's going to be a clearance sale.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. I haven't had the pleasure of watching these sales go down, but I'm excited to see it run this year. So
very cool.
Yeah, I know we have a lot of cool things on our shelves that we've just been kind of holding there. Just so we can wait for this time of year to just kind of like release it all to everybody. And once again, I will repeat, a DMAN mug will be making an appearance.
You heard it here, everybody. That's awesome. And we'll come back with more cool Death Wish Coffee Company news right at you next week.
We now return to Fueled by Deathcast.
All right. This week, I'm really excited. We brought in a friend of the company, friend of ours, and an incredible comic book creator, Mr. Ron Marz. I've been really excited to have him on as a guest, and we got into some really good conversation.
Yeah, he was definitely one of the people that was like, okay, we have this podcast. Who do we want on? Ron Marz. He is the man, and he's so much fun to talk to, and he's such a motivated individual, and he's so epic.
Yeah, and he's also got ties to Death Wish Coffee because he is the writer of the really cool comic book that we came out with last year, the Death Wish Coffee presents Odinforce.
Secret code unlocked. Discount of death.
That's right. This week, if you type in Odinforce at checkout, that's our secret code this week, and it is directly for a Valhalla Java Odinforce Clean Canteen.
So yeah, we will be releasing a new one soon. So now would be the time to get that old one if you're into it, and you can use this code to scoop it up for a much cheaper price.
But tuck in and listen to this amazing conversation that we got to have with Ron Marz, all about the creation of that comic and his own origin story of how he actually got into the business and what fuels him to stay there today.
The Fueled by Death guest.
And we were able to create this Odinforce book. I was there for a lot of the creation of that process, but I wasn't there for what you were doing behind the scenes when you were writing it. Like, can you talk a little bit about like the inception of where this comic came from?
The whole process was really easy because Death Wish was just, a dream to work with in terms of going, well, do what you want. Just make a cool story. I mean, that's actually what Mike and Kane said.
Right.
Those were the only rules. Yeah, make a cool story.
Yeah.
Okay, we can probably do that. So like obviously this is what I've done for 25 years. So it's basically my only job skill. So when they said, "Hey, can we do a comic?" Yeah, we can do a comic. So yeah, I wrote it, but I also kind of put the team together and brought it to fruition. Because
You're almost like a contractor at that point, huh?
Yeah, I was one of the whores, and I was also the pimp.
Nice. So you're double dipping.
But I've done a number of these gigs now where you sort of, somebody comes to you and says, let's create a comic, and you kind of have to build the infrastructure of how the comic actually gets done from concept to finished comics in the box delivered to the doorstep. And if you've done it before, it's not that big a deal. But if you aren't familiar with the business and how this all comes together, it's like alchemy. It's like people have no idea how to make this happen.
Right.
And thank God we're going to keep that information, totally secret.
Okay. Good.
But
Can you write out your process in deep description, please?
Well, really, it's like any other business where you everybody knows everybody else, and so for this, it was, once the idea was in place to do the comic, and we had to assemble the art team, assemble a production guru to pull the whole book together, and then work with a printer to actually get the thing printed. Basically I just called friends. I called guys that I like to work with and whose work I respect. We actually had a different artist attached to it initially. We had an artist in India that I had worked with on the John Carter book for Dynamite. And
really great artist too. Yeah.
Yeah, a guy named Abhishek Malsuni who is terrific and was really into the story. He was really into like drawing Vikings because he had watched the History Channel show.
I love that show.
I'm like an episode behind now from being in Greece. So.
No. What, they don't have Vikings in Greece?
Maybe they do, but I wasn't.
Real Vikings,
I wasn't.
but just not the
I wasn't watching
made for
it.
TV movie.
Dress them up and be like, do a soap opera for me.
Yeah.
But he ended up having, deadline issues and, personal stuff. His mom was in a bus accident and, real life intervened.
Yeah.
So he just wasn't going to be able to get it done in time for us to hit our printer deadline. So I called Rick Leonardi, who is, he's been in the business longer than I have. And Rick has drawn, X-Men and Batman and Cloak and Dagger, Nightwing, you name it, he's left his mark on it.
That's
and
incredible.
He's really an artist. He's just one of my favorite people to work with, one of my favorite people, period. And he happened to have a hole in his schedule. I said, look, the deadline's kind of tight because we blew some deadline with the previous artist. Can you work this in? And he said, yeah. And he was also very into the whole Viking idea of it, and was also a fan of the Vikings show. I think that's the fulcrum around which
Yes,
all of this.
That's nice.
So at that point, I had written the script and we had worked out the story, and Death Wish was cool with what we had done. I guess they had decided that it was a cool story because those were the only parameters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was like, well, do you want coffee in the story somewhere? Do you want
No.
Do you want our Viking horde sitting around a campfire drinking coffee? And they're like, nah, that's lame. That's because I've done gigs before where it's product placement was the reason the thing existed.
Yeah, ham it up, buddy.
And that's fine. I mean, that's totally legit too. But that's completely not what Death Wish wanted it. That they just wanted to be able to hand people the story and have people walk away from it going, well, that was a cool story. Like when the news of the fact we had done this comic started to get out there in the comic industry. I mean, I had dudes calling me up saying, you got a copy of that for me?
Right.
Can you get me that? Because everybody wanted to see what Rick did on it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Rick's a guy who is, really influential in terms of other artists, and everybody wanted to see what he was doing.
Yeah.
And the fact that we actually printed from Rick's darkened pencils rather than having the pencils inked with Black India ink gave it sort of a gritty quality and really allowed the audience to see Rick's pencil strokes, to see what he does, because most comics are penciled and then inked with Black India ink for reproduction. And we just went from Rick's pencils, which were darkened, and then we put the color over it. So it's got a little bit of a different. It's got a graphite quality to it that you don't see a lot. Yeah, and it really kind of matches. Not to get too deep into the weeds with it, but it really the nature of the art matches the time period that we're working in.
Right.
It everything feels really organic. Everything feels kind of real.
Yeah.
Is that rarer in the comic book industry to go from a darkened pencil than the ink, or is it? Do you find that happens?
It's
more
not
often?
all that common because a lot of times guys are working digitally now, and
Yeah, definitely.
and that's basically your ink line. So it's you'd lose some of that some of that gray tone that you get with darkened pencils, and frankly, not everybody's pencils should be seen. Like not everybody's pencils should be darkened because.
Yeah, because a lot of people are doing it quick, and with the idea that the inker's going to come in. And,
Right. So it's a to me this allows kind of a glimpse into the process. But like I said, not everybody's stuff. Rick's stuff is very lively. The Rick stuff is very gestural, and he's really good at motion. Which is a weird thing to say for what is essentially still pictures, but there's a life to his pencils, and sometimes with the wrong inker, some of that life gets beaten out of the work. Yeah. So for this, we could just show his pencils, and we had a really terrific colorist from India named Nanjan Jamberi, who did a really lovely job over Rick's pencils, and it's a very painterly look to the whole job. And it, I thought it turned out great. We turned it around fast, and it turned out great. And then we got Joe Jusko to do the cover.
One of my favorites.
So if you're gonna have a comic with Vikings, you might as well get Joe Jusko to do the cover.
And it all came together. And again, like you said before, Ron, it's a lot about the experience of what you had going into it to be able to put these pieces together to create this project. And kind of speaking on that, you talked about how, you've been in this industry for 25 plus years. How did you get into this industry? Like, did you start off as a writer to become a comic book writer?
No, I always knew I was going to be a writer because I couldn't do anything else. Okay. I was like, once my dream of being the third baseman for the Mets died about sixth grade. Yeah. Because I couldn't hit a curveball.
That's kind of a prerequisite for being a Major League Baseball
player.
As
a sixth grader, though?
Yes.
I mean, come on, you could put in more practice, right? Just make your weaknesses your strengths.
Just figured out it wasn't going to happen. Yeah. But I could always write. I mean, in school, I could always write. I, would help friends with their book reports and term papers and stuff.
So what do you think that was? Do you have like parents that are particularly good at writing, or
no? My parents were not directed in that way at all. I mean, my dad was. I was a late in life baby, so my dad actually grew up in the Depression.
Wow.
So, like, he had a whole different outlook. Like, he didn't read books until he retired.
Oh wow!
Like didn't read books at all.
Right.
And then
you think it was a waste of time or something?
No, he just didn't have time for it. He worked every day. He worked at IBM. He worked every day, and then you come home at the end of the day and you have dinner and maybe watch the Yankee game.
Wow.
So that was not. He just didn't enjoy it. So like me as an adolescent, I had my nose in books all the time. And my mom would buy me any book I wanted. That was like, she would take me to the bookstore.
Excellent.
And would stay there or go to the grocery store and shop or something while I was in the bookstore. But, I don't think she ever rushed me out of a bookstore once in my adolescent life.
That's
she just,
so cool.
And my father would be like, well, why are you buying him all these books? And she'd be like, he can get any book he wants. And it obviously paid off because I'm doing what I'm doing. But once my father retired, he discovered like a love of reading. Like he discovered, oh, this is pretty great. Like once he had the time to devote to it. So one of the greatest joys in my life later on in my father's retirement years was buying him books.
Oh, that's cool.
Because that's not there were never Christmas presents under the tree for my father that were books.
Right.
That was not his thing.
What kind of books did you aim for when you went shopping for him?
He was a big Western fan.
Oh, that's so cool.
And he grew up with a horse that was eventually that actually he grew up in a big family, and one of his brothers actually stole the horse and went off for a ride, and they got hit by a truck.
Oh my God!
The horse died, and the brother got kind of busted up.
Oh my God!
So yeah, these are like the family like the crazy family stories.
Wow.
So my father was always like a horse guy. He loved horses, and he sort of loved cowboys. And like later in life, once he retired, he would go horseback riding all the time, and he would read, and played golf. He played golf.
Was it around this area where we?
I grew up downstate. I grew up in Kingston.
Okay, cool.
So, and he actually grew up in the Kingston area. So that's like where my family's roots are. Actually, when I married my wife, she had a horse.
Oh.
And now we have like 5 horses.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So, my father's been gone for almost 20 years. So like the thing that, like, we just built a barn last year. We built that's still not finished because the contractor screwed us.
Yeah. I remember hearing about that on Twitter.
But the barn, like every time I'm in the barn, I think of my dad, because there would be nothing he would love more than like being in that barn with our horses shoveling horse shit, because
felt like a real man.
If you offered him the scent of an expensive perfume or the smell of horse shit, he'd take the horse shit every time.
Horse shit doesn't smell that bad, by the way.
No.
It's
I don't
got
like
horse shit
expensive.
Horse shit is not bad. Cow shit.
Cow shit's
not
horrible.
good.
Not good.
Not good.
Methane, not good.
But getting back to you though, you were an avid reader, and obviously that led to writing. When did you feel like that was going to be a career that you wanted to pursue?
Like I said, it just never occurred to me to be anything else. So when I was in college, the my hometown newspaper was the Kingston Freeman, and the professor announced that the Freeman was looking for a part-time sports writer, and if anybody in journalism class was interested, he would set up an interview. And I didn't say a word. But the next day, he said, they're still looking for somebody. It's a pretty good gig. So I went in and I'll try it out. And I went in and had the interview. And basically, they were looking for a warm body. They weren't looking to interview anybody.
Right.
They just needed a warm body.
To write scores down.
So I was I was a sophomore in college and was working 20 hours a week at the newspaper.
Was that an internship, or you getting paid for it?
No, I was getting paid for it. It was like a real job,
great.
and it was and like I was actually getting real money.
Yeah,
like this was a real job. All my friends were like working at Burger King.
I was gonna say, like
waitressing at Friendly's.
My
girlfriend was waitressing at Friendly's, and I was like making real money, and I was this is pretty cool. So I just kept the job through college, and then when I got out of college, they hired me full time. And so I was a sports reporter for a few years, and then I moved over and became the entertainment editor, and did mood reviews and stuff like that. So it was actually great training. The being a journalist was great training for comics, because journalism is about writing on deadline and fitting a finite amount of information into a finite space, and that is ultimately what comics is.
Yeah,
monthly comics.
Huh.
You
saying a lot with very little.
Well, you have a deadline. You have 20 or 22 pages, or whatever the length of the book is. It used to be 22. Now most books are 20.
Thank you, ads.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, totally.
But you guys don't know the difference. It's like when comics went from 22 to 20, nobody knew, because nobody's counting the pages.
No.
Jeff knew.
Yeah, I kind of knew. But.
So it was really good training for me. You don't wait for the muse to strike you.
Right.
Sit down, do your job, get the work done.
That's great.
And it was also great training for knowing style, knowing punctuation, knowing grammar. It was all really necessary stuff. So even now, like when I would do my columns on CBR or any sort of prose writing, like I know that stuff backwards and forwards because it was drilled into me at the newspaper. And I read stuff from other people who have like, where's the comic? Does the comic go inside the quotes or outside or what? So it was hugely beneficial for me. And then while I was a journalist, I ended up being friends with a number of artists in the area where I grew up, including Bernie Wrightson and Jim Starlin. And Jim, one day, I edited Jim's first novel. He wrote a prose novel, and I copy edited it for him. And he said, "Geez, you're pretty good at this." And yeah, obviously Jim knew I was working at the newspaper. And he said, "Did you ever think about writing comics?" You know, well, yeah. So I co-wrote my first few jobs with Jim, and he took me by the hand down to Marvel Comics. And
just for the listeners out there, can you explain Jim Starlin a little? Like, I mean, that you're dropping a name that for people who might not be into comics might not understand.
But they've seen Jim's creations.
Yes.
Undoubtedly.
You know, Jim is a writer artist who has been working in comics in the 70s, and he's one of the sort of the grand masters of the medium.
Yes.
He created Thanos, who was the big villain in the Avengers movies.
In the Avengers movies coming up very soon.
He created Drax, the Destroyer, who was in Guardians of the Galaxy. He created Gamora, who was in the Guardians of the Galaxy. So a huge amount of the Marvel Cinematic Universe depends on the stuff that Jim has done. So Jim was then and still is one of my best friends. And
he kind of just brought you into this.
He said, "Hey, you want to do this?" And I said, "Sure, let's try it." And obviously that was a life-changing moment. But, you know, Jim brought a bunch of people into comics. He's a generous, wonderful person.
Comics would not be the same without that man.
And that's kind of how comics work, is that you help the generation behind you. You give a hand when you can. And so, you know, Jim just told Marvel, "Hey, this guy's, you know, going to co-write some Silver Surfer with me." And that was my on-the-job training. I co-wrote a few issues with Jim where he basically gave me the skeleton of the story, and then I would write the script. And I think my first solo gig was a backup story in a Silver Surfer annual that was actually supposed to be written and drawn by a guy named Jim Sherman, who was an artist that did a lot of work in the 70s and 80s, worked on Legion of Superheroes and a number of other titles. And Sherman got lost down in the Yucatan.
Oh no!
And like Marvel couldn't find him.
Oh no!
Like he was supposed to do this gig, and like he disappeared. And you know, I was not surprised because I had actually been in the Yucatan with Starlin and Sherman a few years before, and got up to all sorts of mischief.
Why is the Yucatan a thing?
Because you could
all comics come from the Yucatan.
Because at that point you could go down to the Yucatan and live like a king for like $100 a month.
It's not that way anymore.
No, because the cruise ships have found Cancun and Tulum and all that. But you know, he was like off, you know, backpacking with his, you know,
they found him, right?
Oh yeah, he eventually
in that story,
dead, surrounded by.
He eventually surfaced, but like in the meantime, they needed 20 pages filled, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to do this?" And so that was my first solo writing. It was like the fourth script I'd ever written, but it was my first solo one, and they liked the story well enough, and it got a good enough response that, you know, the work kept coming after that, and I've been doing it ever since.
And you have spanned a career of, you know, both big ones, both Marvel and DC. I mean, like you brought up Silver Surfer, but I mean, you are most known for your work on Green Lantern as well, and the 90s wonderful DC Marvel crossover that you had a hand in as well. That was fun. But throughout all these years and all the jobs you've gotten with comics, what fuels you to keep going in comics? Because the way you describe it is it's not something necessarily that you just fell into, but it wasn't something that you started off being like, I'm going to be a comic book writer. You kind of were like, I'm going to be a writer, and you kind of went into comics. What's kept you there? What fuels you to keep doing that?
I want my kids to eat.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's commendable.
So but I love comics, and I love that you can tell stories with pictures. Yeah. There are obviously a lot of ways to tell your story. write plays, you can write novels, you can write movies, but comics is still really kind of a pure way of telling your story, because you can do it with just a few people, and I've always been from early teenage years, I was a big art fan, like discovering Frank Frazetta at 13 or whatever was pretty life-changing.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's just
blows your mind.
That's the coolest stuff in the world.
Yeah.
And, I saw Star Wars when I was 11 years old. And that was life-changing. And you're like, that's a whole new world that I've never been exposed to. And
Are you excited for Rogue One?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
When Force Awakens came out, I was an 11-year-old kid again.
Me too. Totally.
I was an 11-year-old kid, weeping in the audience because. So that's stuff that's a lot of the stuff that I, at that magic age of 11, 12, 13, Frazetta, Star Wars, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Tolkien, Robert E. Howard, all of that stuff had a huge influence on me and still does. And I think in a lot of ways, the stuff that you discover at that age is what stays with you for the rest of your life. In a lot of ways, I'm just repeating all of that. The fact that, the Death Wish Vikings, find Loki and Odin. I mean, look, that's
spoiler.
That's all about the fact that I was reading Walt Simonson's Thor run when I was in high school, and it's just the best comics ever. Yeah. It all, the stuff you consume at that age, and other ages too, but I think especially at that age, keeps coming back out.
That initial causation of wonderment.
I think when you're not quite a child at that point, but you're not quite an adult, and you're sort of the stuff that you discover at that age is full of wonder, and in a lot of ways, that's still what I'm doing. That's 25 years later in comics. That's what I'm doing, because I love the fact that I can make up stories, and I see the stories in my head, and I can't draw to save my life. When you say to somebody, "I do comics," "Oh, do you draw?"
Right.
No, I can't.
That's
draw
the
to save
first
my
thing
life.
always. Yeah.
At all, but I can see it. I can see what I want in my head, and I can describe that in a script to an artist. That's still the best part of my job, is when the art comes back from like what's been in my head,
and you get to see
is
it.
now turned into something real and concrete. That's still priceless. That's still the moment in this process where you can't put any price tag on it, because it's just the coolest thing.
You're taking something that has never existed before. This is what I like about writing music, is you're making something that until this point had never existed before.
Yeah, and you're taking elements that are out there,
right?
But you're putting it in a salad that didn't exist before. And even when you do you're working for Marvel or DC and you're playing with their toys, it's still something new and different, but it's one step more when you're doing creator-owned stuff, and it's just your thing, and it didn't exist at all before you brought it into being.
Yeah,
that's fun, man.
Yeah.
That's better. That's my job.
It's I don't know how to say it. Maybe this is a bit too strong of a statement, but our imaginations make us gods.
Yeah.
Of new worlds.
Yeah.
That have never existed before.
Yeah. It's you are the deity. You are the one who makes this all happen.
I feel like this is going to blow into a Westworld conversation real soon.
All right, don't spoil me on the last episode.
No.
We were in Greece for that. We still haven't seen it.
That's a whole other conversation. I do want to talk about the creator-owned stuff, but just before that, you kind of touched on this creation process, even working with Marvel, like how you put it, working with the toys that Marvel and DC have into play, but the joy that you have from creating. One of the things you're most known for is creating an actual character in Green Lantern, Kyle Rayner, and is the idea behind creating a character when you're working for a big company like Marvel or DC Comics? is that coming from down on high, or is that you purposely giving that creation life?
It's different for different situations. But
Correct.
For Kyle, it was, DC. I was working at Marvel. That's where I started my career.
Yep.
And I did Surfer and Thor and some other odds and ends. And DC called me. I had done a little bit of Green Lantern work for him on like short stories and things. And DC called me to say, we'd like you to take over Green Lantern. And I was like, cool.
Yeah, right.
That rocks. That Hal Jordan costume was pretty cool, and I saw him on Super Friends when I was a kid.
Yeah,
and they were like,
totally.
And then they were like, oh, yeah, well, here's what's going to happen. So that's when they dropped the other shoe of...
So they had the idea.
They had the idea that, that Hal was going to be removed as the main character. Mm-hmm. And they gave me literally like a page and a half of notes that sort of described what they generally wanted in the storyline that ended up becoming known as Emerald Twilight, which was my first 3 Green Lantern issues. And then the last line of those notes was, and a new Green Lantern is created.
Oh my God, that's literally what they left you with.
And that was it.
Wow.
That was as much direction as we were given. So I said, well, does it have to be somebody from Earth, or can it be an alien? They're like, no, we'd like the main character to be human. And I was like, well, can it be a man or can it be a woman? They said, well, we'd like to keep a male lead. But that was it. That was the only direction that we were given, and we were kind of left to our own devices to just make it up. Now, I'm sure if we had, come up with something crazy or completely unacceptable to them, they would have reeled us back in. But Kyle kind of came into being pretty much as he was envisioned as you ended up seeing him in the comic. So we got to make up, a new Green Lantern, a new, iconic character for the DC universe. In terms of those, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern are really the mainstays.
Totally, the Justice League right there.
So I got to make up a completely new guy, and so I got the best of both worlds. I got the whole Green Lantern mythology and the whole like larger DC universe to play in, but I got to make up my own guy, and I wasn't saddled with like 30 years of continuity.
Right.
So it was really the absolute best situation you could have, and DC really let us do what we wanted with it. I don't think you would get that kind of freedom now because everything's much more editorially controlled and sort of corporately directed because this stuff's worth a hell of a lot more money than it was back then.
A lot more investment.
Yeah, I mean, thanks to crossing over into other media, these are multi-billion-dollar franchises
and
now.
Speaking of movies, in 2020, we are getting the Green Lantern Corps, so fingers crossed that Kyle appears in that.
That would be nice.
Yes.
How cool is it to see some of these, these creations that you've had now become real life people on the big screen?
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, Kyle ended up being like on the Superman animated show.
Heck yeah.
And there were plenty of action figures and all that kind of stuff. And it's cool and it's gratifying, but it's also, you keep it in perspective and you just go, well, for one, you don't own it. It's DC's baby, and ultimately, when push comes to shove, that's the way it's going to be. Once I left wrote Green Lantern for a little over 7 years.
Wow.
Once I left the book, it was hard for me to read the book.
It's not
because
your
it's
story anymore.
It's like watching somebody else raise your kids, even though it's not really your kid.
Yeah,
it's still a little weird. It's like you've sent your kid off to a foster family, and even though a lot of the people that came on after me did a really nice job, it's still not quite what you would have done. So you have mixed emotions.
Yeah.
So it's easier to just distance yourself from it completely because even though Darryl Banks and Darryl was the artist that co-created Kyle with me, even though it was our baby, ultimately it's not our baby.
Yeah.
Your baby was on lease.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm totally thankful for the opportunity and the time we had with him, but you have to be an adult and sort of surrender. You surrender your baby after a certain point, and somebody else takes over.
What was the hardest to give up?
I don't know. I mean, I had been in the business for a while at that point, and you sort of go, well, okay, you get it.
Yeah.
I think the things that I regret when you move away from a character or a book, mostly it's just that I regret that I'm not working with that particular creative team anymore.
Yeah.
Like I'm not working with, like I was not working with Darryl Banks anymore on a monthly basis because the people that you work with and that you end up clicking with become like family.
Yeah.
Because you deal with them almost every day.
Yeah.
And really my best friends in the world are in comics.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, live in halfway across the country or halfway across the world. And you don't, you see them once or twice a year, but you end up developing really strong bonds because you create something together and you work together on a daily basis, really. You might not be in touch every day, but you write the script and the artist is drawing your stuff every day, and you're getting pages, maybe not every day, but on a fairly regular basis. It's it's kind of like a marriage, and once that goes away because you've left onto separate projects, there's a little bit of angst involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other side of this argument, obviously, is we're talking a lot about working for the major two, but the other side is the creator-owned side of comics, where you basically own what you're creating. And I know that you are working on stuff right now. In fact, you're probably going to leave this podcast and go work on it. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that because it's pretty exciting.
Well, you know what? As a writer in this business, you can afford to do creator-owned stuff and do company-owned stuff, and generally what that means is the company-owned stuff pays the bills, and the creator-owned stuff is stuff that you're either not getting a page rate for or you're getting a lesser page rate. So as a writer, you can kind of balance the two. As an artist, it's much harder because you've only got time to do one project a month.
Right.
But I've tried to, over the last number of years, tried to balance doing creator-owned things and doing company-owned things. And I've done a number of things. I did a book called Samurai Heaven and Earth, which was like a historical adventure at Dark Horse. A book called Shinku, which is a modern-day samurai vampire hunter.
You'd love that.
That's right up my alley.
Yeah, you'd love that.
I'll get you copies of that.
Oh,
one.
man.
If you have to pick one or the other, I think most creators would tell you they want to do creator-owned because it's yours. Nobody tells you what to do. Nobody says you have to have Supergirl in this issue because it's a crossover and her sales need a bump. You're very much the gods of your own universe. You can do whatever you want. And that's hugely satisfying. And I've talked to some creators who feel like that's like working without a net too. It's a little scarier because there are no parameters. You're just left to your own devices. But I think that's great, man. I don't want parameters if I don't have to have them. So there's always some sort of creator-owned thing going on. And at the moment, I am the editor-in-chief of Ominous Press, which is
so exciting.
Which is a company that existed in the 90s for a couple of years, in the mid-90s. And it was founded by my buddy Bart Sears, who I've been friends with for 20 years.
I love Bart.
We love Bart Sears.
And he's worked on a bunch of stuff at Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
But he had Ominous Press in the 90s to tell sort of heroic adventure and fantasy stories and, big dudes with swords.
Yeah, totally.
Love it.
And when the market tanked in the mid-90s, the speculator bubble burst in the comic market. And,
Marvel almost went bankrupt.
Marvel did go bankrupt.
They did go bankrupt, yeah.
So it was, the mid-90s to 2000 were like a really grim time in comics, and a lot of small publishers and a lot of comic book shops actually went out of business, just completely tanked. And one of them was Ominous Press. They put out a few books, did pretty well, and then the market just dropped out from under everybody. So we restarted Ominous Press last year, or we decided last year we were going to start it, and this year we've actually started to do stuff. So I'm the editor-in-chief, and I'm writing 2 of the titles. We're doing 3 titles. So I'm writing book called Demigod.
That one looks the coolest.
Andy Smith is drawing, which is sort of like, what if Deadpool met Thor and, was kind of a douche.
Yeah. Yep. That's totally the tagline for the book, too.
So Andy Smith is drawing that, and I'm doing a book called Prometheus, which is drawn by Tom Ranney, which is just amazing looking.
Yeah, it is.
And that's kind of Greek gods meet Matrix kind of a story where there's a game that this post-apocalyptic society plugs into every day to kind of keep them docile. And in the game, the characters are these wondrous godlike creations, but the reality is they're basically these monsters that have been grown in vats that are plugged into the game. And they eventually wake up from their slumber and realize that they're not gods in a idyllic world. They're monsters in a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
Crazy.
Whoa.
And the story really jumps off from there, which is, well, if you thought you were a god and you turn out you're a monster, what do you do? So
That's deep.
Yeah, it works on a couple of different levels, and I think Tom Ranney is a guy that he actually drew one of my first Silver Surfer issues. So we've both been in the business that long.
Yeah.
And when we started talking about this, like restarting the company and what titles we were going to do, we started talking about Prometheus. I was like, well, Tom's the guy. Tom's the right one to do this. And a lot of comics is about that. It's about creative casting. It's about putting not just the right artist on a book, but putting the right team together. Because if one link in the chain doesn't work properly, the whole thing can fall apart. So I'm doing those two books. Bart Sears is writing and drawing a book called Giant Killers that I'm editing. And by June, July of next year, we'll actually launch all of the titles through a publishing partner that is yet to be announced, but is
very cool.
But we're in the process of signing the contract.
But right now you can go to ominouspress.com, I believe, right, and you can sign up for a lot of the teasers that you have out.
Yeah, ominouspress.com has a number of books for sale, but it's also got teaser material. We did a world premiere issue that gives a taste of each of the three series. And then we've been going back and reprinting the material that Ominous published initially in the 90s as a 4-issue miniseries called Legendary. And I was uncomfortable just reprinting stuff that was 20 years old.
Right.
And a lot of it is reprint. Some of it is new stuff. Some of it's stuff that was intended for print back in 95 that never saw the light of day because the bottom dropped out. That is being seen for the first time. And then the 4th issue of the Legendary series is actually completely new material to tie off those storylines that were started 20 years ago. So the 4 Legendary issues, I think the 4th one should be out by, 3rd one's out now. 4th one should be out by end of January. That one actually has a cool Jim Starlin cover on it.
That is
so
cool.
everything comes back around.
That is
Nice.
awesome.
So we felt like we owed it to the readership that started with these books 20 years ago to kind of pay off that storyline.
Yep.
And then we'll start fresh, middle of this coming year, and it's I'm a part owner of the company. Along with Bart and Andy and our publisher Sean Husvar, who was involved in Ominous back then too. So it's very much creator-owned material, and it's some of the most fun you can have doing comics because you're working with your friends.
It sounds like a family again. Like
you're working
you said.
with your friends, and you're doing. It's like when we were kids and you wanted to put on a play in the backyard. Dad will make the sets and Mom will make the costumes.
That's awesome.
You're just doing the stuff on your own, making all the decisions, and at the end of the day, what you have is exactly what you want. There are no compromises to be made other than the ones that deadlines demand. And
right.
That's just comics in general. So it's been. We had everybody together in New Jersey a couple weeks ago, and it was, we kind of had to step back and go, well, we've actually accomplished quite a lot in just a year.
Yeah.
So, and now things should really start to ramp up as we get our publishing deal set and start to get this stuff out into the world.
That's awesome.
pumped.
Well, we'll definitely be looking for that. Finally, is there anything for you personally that you can plug that's coming up in the near future that people can look for? Outside of Ominous Press, obviously.
Half of the stuff that I'm doing hasn't been announced.
Oh yes, that is the nature of the beast.
That's the nature of comics. Is you got to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
Or
you don't have to do anything, man.
The corporate the corporate ninjas come and find you.
Right, exactly.
Come on, we're just a small little podcast. They'll never find out. We won't tell anybody.
I can hint at stuff, so I can say that I'm doing some work for a company called Magic Leap in Florida.
Ooh.
It is I guess most people would call it a virtual reality company, but it's really mixed reality.
Cool.
And so I've been working with them for a couple of years and working on things that we're just stockpiling. And eventually, I think in 2017 you'll start to see that. And that's kind of world-shaking technology.
Magic Leap.
If you Google Magic Leap, you'll find some articles that'll blow your hair back.
Thank you so much for being a guest on our Fueled by Deathcast, Mr. Ron Marz. It was a pleasure, as always, to talk to you.
And more than that, thank you for being a friend of the company. I always love seeing you here, man. I always love it when you come by. It's always like, oh, Uncle Ron's here.
It's just cool to hang out with you guys.
This has been Fueled by Deathcast, a Death Wish Coffee Company podcast production. Thanks for listening.